These are some tips from the real world. That's an engine performance class. And so we got your answer sheet there. Thomas, see that answer sheet? Here one of those. This is the some tips thing. This is a 2001. This is, the whole thing is not about this same car. I will talk about it some. It illuminated the mill and through this code. You know, the girl worked here and she came and said, check this. And so I checked it and I got this PO421 for the warm-up cat. And it was, I said, this thing needs to go to the dealer because it's under warranty. The catalytic converter is covered for 80,000 miles or 8 years. At that time, the car was under warranty. And a healthy catalyst will store enough oxygen to make the necessary changes in the exhaust stream so the CO2 is high and everything else is low. All right, so a 421 may mean one of the more has happened. Catalytic converter is no longer functioning properly. An oxygen sensor is not reading or functioning properly. A spark plug is foul. Could be any of that. All right, so the upstream and the downstream, and that's what's on this car. You notice the downstream is not as active as the, as far as the voltage range as the upstream, but the point is it's pretty much following the same frequency, and the criteria that the computer was looking for was not there, and so this was why we got the PO421 code. All right, so the Mazda was under warranty. Like I say, she wheeled up to the shop after they did the work, and she said the check engine light was back on, and so I pulled the code, and it's a 421. You see, technically they were going to pull the code and do the work and all that too. All right, so it was they to replace this one. You might notice there's not any oxygen sensors in front of that one or behind it. It's just another catalyst thing there, right? So I didn't encounter this before at the dealer where I worked. I drew one that had it was a Ford Contour that was set up the same way. And it had a PO421, and I was doing the drivability work, and so I went in there to the parts room, and I says, typically you depend on the parts guy to ask you the pertinent questions. If there's something he needs to know, sometimes they ask you questions you don't know how in the sound bill to answer. Like we had go in there, sometimes they'll say, I need such and such a fuel tank sender for a Taurus or whatever. He goes, is it a 16 or an 18-gallon tank? Well, the first time they asked me that, I said, how the heck do I know? Am I supposed to drain the gas out and measure it or what? Well, then I found out that a station wagon's got an 18-gallon tank and a sedan's got a 16-gallon tank. Well, it wasn't that hard when you figured it out. But anyway, he didn't say a word. I said, I need to order a catalytic converter for this car. This gave me the year model, and they ordered this one. And I didn't even see it. Whenever they came in, and I was doing other drivability work, so I threw the other guy, he popped the catalyst on it. He didn't, I don't know if he cleared the code or not, but he just put it back out there, and they come back in, check engine light's still on. Well, I found out that they changed the wrong cat. Now this is a different kind of warm-up cat here. This guy here, he's a cat that's warming up, right? But this particular warm-up cat right here was the one we should have replaced. You notice that when you're looking down in front of the manifold, there's an oxygen sensor here, and there's another oxygen sensor down there. Anytime you've got a PO421, it's going to be that one it's talking about. Okay? It's not going to be that one back there. That's not going to throw you any kind of code at all unless it's completely clogged up. And typically, if you've got a clogging problem, it's going to be in this one. It won't be in that one. This is about the size of a coffee can. It's about that big, And it goes right where it comes down the manifold. And that was on his car. So watch out for that. Okay? Now, while the PO421 won't typically affect engine power, although the rear oxygen sensor can, if it's if it's not telling the truth, the PCM may do crazy things with the fuel trim to try to keep the catalytic converter happy, because they don't want to have to replace the catalytic converter under warranty if they can help it, because they're expensive and the factory doesn't like that. That's why it shuts down the injector when you start getting a misfire on one cylinder, because they don't want to put a bunch of fuel in there and overheat the cap, right? And that's the strategy they typed in. Well, be careful when condemning the catalyst for loss of power. You know those throttle body injected Chevrolets that's got the 2 injectors in there? I talked about this the other day out in the shop. If you got a fuel filter stopped up on one of those, you'd swear you had a bad catalytic converter, because it feels like that. It just feels like it's got no power. And they're supposed to have 12 pounds of fuel pressure when a fuel filter can clog up and it just won't hardly go. If it's got that kind of fuel injection on it, beware of that. Fuel filter don't feel that way on hardly nothing else, but on that part it does. Well, talk about some good tests here. Now, question 1, get your test paper there. What was the first emission control device ever used on a passenger car in the United States? All right, the temperature check. All right, now I gotta do play the video thing here.
Old thermometer and I shoot bank 1, I'm reading 182. I shoot bank 2, I'm reading nearly 300 degrees. Thinking that we got a catalyst that's partially clogged. Alright, we're going to go top. On the top of the catalyst, we're shooting 400 degrees. Coming out of the catalyst, we're shooting 200. So we got a catalyst
that's a little troubling when you see that it's hotter going in than it is coming out, right? All right. Yeah, then. So you'd expect the exhaust to be hotter right where it's leaving the head, but the logic of warm-up cat temperature goes like this. If the catalyst is working, the temperature reading from the outgoing gases should be a bit higher because of the chemical reaction occurring inside of the catalytic converter. Have you guys ever noticed on a scan tool that it'll give you the temperature of the catalytic converter nowadays? Have you seen that? What temperatures do you usually see? Catalytic converter temperatures. Really? Seriously? Inside the cat? It's gonna be really, really hot. It's over 1,000 degrees in there. I mean, it's really, really hot. All right. If the catalyst is partially plugged, the engine side of the converter will be hotter or the same temperature as the incoming reading. So that's basically one way you do it. That's another warm-up cat right there. Okay. All right. Walker makes good aftermarket catalytic converters. Really good ones. All right. Here's what Walker has to say about temperature testing at the weld. And the weld is right here. And that's where they like for you to test them. Keep in mind the converter's rear weld ring temperature is directly related to the amount of work the converter is performing. Elevated temperatures may indicate an emissions issue. Right? If the rear weld ring is significantly cooler than the front, the converter may not be lighting off. This may indicate the converter has failed or the exhaust mixture is not correct, and it also can mean the converter is trying to clog up. All right, the converter temperatures will not exceed 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit on a properly running engine. Periodic operation above 1,600 can negatively affect the precious metals. And this is Walker talking right here. Reducing its efficiency, excessive temperatures can reduce the converter's durability, or if high enough, destroy the converter's matting or substrate. And this right here, Walker makes good, I mean they do, they make good stuff. You know, damaged matting and melted substrates typically occur. See that one there, glowing red hot? I don't know if you've ever seen that before, but it's really scary when it happens. You know, too hot is bad. Test question 2. Most contemporary engines require spark plug replacement every A, 50,000 miles, B, 60,000 miles, C, 80,000 miles, or D, 100,000 miles.
Is this maintenance book or what?
Maintenance book. Yeah, the maintenance book, like when you would look in the, you know. Walker makes good aftermarket cats. That's my little saying on this whole thing right here. You ever seen one look like that? That typically means that it's been too hot a few times, or at least once, rather. Yeah, that, see, the bronze, blue, rainbow discoloration of the shell typically indicates elevated temperatures. If it's removed, you look through the substrate to observe whether the small passageways are melted or collapsed, right? And so sometimes the catalytic converter is made so that it's way down in a pipe so you can't see that stuff. You know, so you may have to borescope it or something. Now, if the cat fails a temperature gun test, if it's hotter at the inlet than at the outlet, it's a lot more certain than if it passes a temperature gun test. So if it can pass the test and still be partially clogged. You got that? Just because it passed the test don't mean you're done looking at the catalytic converter. And that's I like a go, no-go test. You remember the test I showed you on the alternators where you use the diode test function of the meter to check the diodes in the alternators when you set it on the bench before you ever do anything else? If it fails that test, it's a bad alternator. If it passes the test, it could still be a bad alternator. You get me? But there's some of the tests out there that they are only conclusive if it fails. And that's one of them, and this is kind of one of them right here too. So this is basically, you know, what I typically, you can actually take a temperature gun when you've got one of our vehicles that's running like it should and just test that. It's really smart to go ahead and get you some numbers on this. And I'll tell you something else. If you have to replace the cat, You might have, some of y'all were, most of y'all were around here, I think, when we replaced the catalytic converter on that Trailblazer. You remember why we replaced the catalytic converter on the Trailblazer? The black Trailblazer, the dark blue Trailblazer, whatever color it is. It was,
Was it all burned up or something?
it was, well, we didn't take it off and look down in it. We actually measured the pressure. And the way we measured the pressure was we took the oxygen sensor out, screwed my special made tool in there, hooked the pressure gauge up to it, and it had 5 pounds of pressure between the engine and the cat. And that told us that we had cat issues because it ought not to have any pressure there, right? Now, this one right here, there was a Monte Carlo that we worked on. It would only run 45 miles an hour top speed. It was awful, but it passed the temperature gun test. When I shot it up here in front of it and behind it, it was hotter behind than it was in the front. You know, is that conclusive? What? So a vacuum gauge test didn't produce a smoking gun either. Like if you put a vacuum gauge on the engine and you crack the throttle, and whenever you first crack the throttle, what does the vacuum do? Drops. If you hold it after you crack it, what does it do then? It recovers, unless you got it in gear or it's loaded. But when you got a clogged up exhaust, it's like a loaded engine, pretty much, and it's gonna, you know, cause the vacuum to go down and stay down. So if you're in neutral and you pop that throttle up about, you know, 2,000 RPM, and the gauge goes down and stays down, provided that it ain't out of time or something like that. You know? All right, so drawing on the muffler shot method, we drilled a 1/8 hole right in front of the catalytic converter and used a cheap fuel pump pressure vacuum gauge and found this. Ha! I got the slide in the wrong place, didn't I? I'll come back to that one. No, I won't. Let me back up. That was a question, I'm sorry. I got confused by my own picture. This reading is, this is test question 3. This reading is A, too high, B, too low, C, just right, or D, unnecessary. This reading, we're measuring spark plug center electrode resistance, and we're getting this reading right here.
Answers on the screen?
Well, why are you telling me that? Maybe I should discount that question because he ratted you guys out. What's up with that? All right. All right, I plugged the cap. With this piece of high temp hose held up to the small hole we drilled, we found the pressure between the engine and the cat actually pegged the gauge. This sucker here, whenever Jesse was holding that piece of high temperature hose up to that 1/8 hole we drilled in front of the cat, it literally pegged that gauge. It just put it all the way to the bottom. And that was between the engine and the cat. All right. If we'd stopped with a temperature test, we wouldn't have found it so quickly. All right. We put a blind pop rivet in the test hole when we were done. And you can do that, and the muffler shops will do that. And you know, what they're looking at, and what everybody ought to be looking at, is what's the fastest way we can determine what the problem is here. Now, what I started to say about the Trailblazer earlier is you don't take the exhaust off. If the catalyst is welded in there and it's not bolted in, you don't just take the exhaust and put it on the floor and cut the old catalyst out and then put the weld the new one back in and bolt it back up. You know why that won't work?
That's not the problem.
No, because the pipe won't line up. There ain't no way, man. You ain't no way you're going to be good enough to put that sucker back like it's supposed to go. Now, what we did do on the Trailblazer, we took it down and we made marks, really strong marks that would stay there, and then they used the cutter to cut it off over at welding, and they just tacked it to make sure that, you know, with using the marks that we made and all that, and when we put it back up there, they cut the angles the same to make sure it would bolt up. When we found out it would bolt up and it was lined up and everything, then we took it down and then they finished the weld, you know, over at the welding department. But the first time I ran into that was when I had to cut some collapsed pieces of pipe out of a 72 LTD I was driving because they had collapsed on the inside. It had laminated pipe and the exhaust was stopped up. That didn't even have a catalytic converter. But anyway, I cut that out, and even in my very young age at the time, I was 23 I think, I said, I am not going to be able to do this, weld this together the right way so that they'll do that. Who is that? Call me back about 2 o'clock. I think we're going to be driving it out of there by then, Danny. All right. But, anyway, so we put a blind pop rivet to test hole, like I say. All right, now then, even 5 pounds of pressure is too much. That's what we found on the Trailblazer. So new catalytic converters can come with an 8mm. If you see one of these 18mm plugs where the O2 sensor goes, keep that plug. If you have to screw that plug out and put you hang on to that dadgum plug because you may need it. That's the same threads as one of the big spark plugs, right? You drill a hole through this thing and tap some threads and screw a brake bleeder into it and you've made you a tool. It's a whole lot cheaper. As a matter of fact, here's one right here that I screwed out of a converter and kept, right? And since y'all know this is up here, I'm gonna put it in my pocket so somebody don't walk off with it when I go. All right, so now you got a tool you can use to check exhaust back pressure, but you can, Summit Performance sells these O2 sensor hole plugs for $6 if you wanna buy one from Summit Performance. All right, if the cap's clogged badly enough, it may not start. You might remember my story about the guy working in the next bay that was stumped, and when he took half the spark plugs out of a Mercur no start and it fired up. One of these. And I says, I told him, he said, it's got everything it needs, it won't start, I don't know what's wrong with it. And he was an experienced mechanic. I said, take half the plugs out. So he took 3 of the 6 spark plugs out, and it fired up and sounded like a machine gun. What the heck does that mean? I said, that means their exhaust is stopped up. And he says, how did you know this? I said, I don't remember. I don't remember where I learned that. It's been so many years ago, but I do know that means your exhaust. And he put a catalytic converter on that one. Okay, test question 4. What kind of vehicle is this? Chevy, Ford, Chrysler, or Peugeot? You got it. All the information you need is right there in that picture. As for loss of power, homemade steel gas tanks like this one here, that my company used one when I was working in Texas, will always produce very fine, powdery, rustic clogged screens and filters. Not only fine rust, but bad rust too. And the 79 LeBaron I drove back from Dallas back in 1980 had a clogged pickup screen for that reason. I had to fly up there, fix the car, and drive it back. I didn't know what was wrong with it when I flew up there. But when I got about 100 miles into the trip headed back, I felt it losing power, and it died. And I pulled off the side of the road, and I said, this thing's starving for fuel. And so I pulled the fuel pump off, going back to the tank and tried to blow through it, and it wouldn't. I couldn't get nothing through that, you know, because you'd all be able to just blow air through it. It didn't have a fuel pump in the tank. It had just one of these on the side of the block. So I said, that stopped up back there. That's what the deal is. And so after everything settled away from that sock in the tank, I drove another 40 miles, stopped at a gas station, and I took the gas cap off and borrowed the guy's air hose and blew back through that thing. A bunch of gas went booyah. I said, I blew that sock off of there, so we ain't have this problem no more. But some farms have a homemade steel gas tank today. Be aware of that. This right here is what you see. This is a text tip I sent into Motor Age. This right here, if you got like one of these 5.4s or something, you know, it's got these. They got a little snap ring where you can take a snap ring loose and pull that fuel pressure regulator. There's a screen right there. See? There's a screen in there, and all this rusty crud. This was a farmer's vehicle, and he had a gas tank at his farm where he would buy gas in bulk. And the gas tanks got to be coated on the inside. If you let it go long enough, it's going to start rusting anyway, even on a regular gas tank. And that is really powder fine. It won't get past the fuel filter. It got past this screen here, partially stopped it up, and it will actually go so far as to clog up the daggum injectors. And this right here, injector cleaner won't cut that rust. So you can take the injectors out a lot of times and beat that rust out of them and kind of blow backwards through them with them energized. You can get enough of it out of them where they'll work. But boy, is it a pain. Well, that's why testing fuel quality is so important. Okay? Now, test question 5. What's the purpose of this relay? It shuts the engine down, it feeds the injectors, the coil, and alternator, provides power to the crank sensor, or it delivers reference voltage to the GP sensor. Obviously the same vehicle we looked at earlier. Flex fuel vehicles, some flex fuel vehicles use a fuel composition sensor. That's what a new one looks like on one of these Chevys, you know, like a mid-00s. If that sensor lies about how much alcohol is in the fuel, the PCM can overfuel and cause intermittent no starts due to spark plug fouling. There's one doing that in here. it takes more E85 to get an engine started. And if this is telling the PCM, hey, I'm half alcohol, then the PCM's gonna put more in there. And it may foul the plugs and it may not, depending on what kind of mood it's in. It also has to do with temperature and everything else. And so what the deal is, that sometimes it won't start, you let it set 3 or 4 hours, it'll start the next time. See if it warms up outside, the air temperature is a little warmer, it changes the things a bit. If the fuel composition sensor is not telling the truth, well, finish the thought. Now the FCS PID reads a percentage. The one we got out here was reading 45%. And I called the lady that owned the vehicle and I says, what kind of fuel are you using? Do you use E85 or any of this alcohol? I said, oh heck no, we don't ever use that garbage, we just put regular gas in it. Well, if that was the case, it shouldn't have been reading 45%. Well, the problem was, the fuel composition sensor, like the one we had up in there, is like $700 at the dealer. It ain't cheap, you know. Okay. When I reach the point in a repair that I'm waiting on parts, I should use that time to play games on my phone, find something productive to do, head for Hardy, ask for a promotion and a raise, whine, or cop an attitude.
That's the Hardee's.
Whatever you're driving the customer's car, you don't need to be going by Hardee's or credit union or something like that, because if they see you there, and they might, you could be in hot water. So be really careful with that.
Test driving a vehicle?
No, the customer won't like it. Test driving a vehicle will mean you went to Hardee's to get a biscuit. All right, hard starting. To get a fuel injected engine started, the PCM typically has to double pulse the injectors while you're starting it, just like you had to pack the gas on the carburetor to wet the manifold when you was firing it up. If that double pulse isn't happening, you could have a hard start cold situation. Be aware of that and troubleshoot accordingly. Remember the little 97 Altima I told you about that didn't have a signal, a start signal going to the engine controller because somebody had moved a fuse? And it would just spin and spin and spin and spin and spin and spin. But after that, the rest of the day it was okay. And somebody over in a shop over there put, you know, an engine controller on it and all this stuff trying to fix that. And it turned out all he needed to do was some yo-yo pull the fuse and put it where the radio fuse was. All right. A slightly weak sparking engine with only one coil in a distributor can also cause hard cold starting. I saw a Taurus one time with a hard cold start, and it was only capable of putting out about 50,000 volts in the coil. Wouldn't stretch but about ½ an inch. It ought to stretch almost an inch and be blue. All right, number 7. When doing an oil change, I should A, get a cheater pipe and turn the drain plug clockwise until it turns round and round. Check the drain plug for distorted threads or a leaking gasket. Start the drain plug and walk away for a while. Lower the car halfway and rotate the tires while the oil is running, or take a nap in the trunk. All right?
Wait, I see multiple things you could do with this.
I only see one thing that you should do, okay? All right. And this one right here, I gotta start this one because it goes for a bit. Hello. Hello. There we are.
2009 Dodge Struggle 5.9. All right, Joe, I want you to go spin the starter, and I'm going to show you this spark, what it looks like. You'll get to see it in a minute. All right, we're checking the spark. Got a test light grounded to the alternator. Test light's okay. They're going to fight me through that. I'm just going through that port to the alternator. Go ahead. But I can't stretch it over about that far. Okay, now we're going to stop. We're going to reconnect this. We're going to connect a forward coil, which is a coil is a coil. You know what I mean? You can actually do it. All right. Now unplug it right there. And we got this forward ignition coil down here. We're going to connect to this secondary amateur. Can unplug the coil. All right. There you go. Now put one of these red wires in each one of those. Red wire in each one. Power up this forward coil and trigger it using this Chrysler ignition system, this Dodge ignition system. In the wires, buddy. Here, here. Okay. All right, now do it. See where the wires are? Hi, girl. See you in there.
Where does Melissa work?
Oh, over at across from Pizza Hut.
So I gotta go I'm picking up her son today and I need a car seat.
You got it.
I passed my test. I'm a senior.
Oh, Well, I thought you said you cashed your check in your senior.
That was nice.
Okay, all right. Well, we're fiddling with his truck here, and we're doing a little video while we're with it. All right, now what we want is primary, and not to be close to that secondary, right? Okay, this is sort of a dicey way to do this, but we're gonna do it anyway. All right, now then, when we spin this over, we're gonna look at this other qualifier. Now let's watch the other qualifier. Come on, Joel! That look different? Yeah. All right, do it again. Do it again. See how far it's stretching out, how hot it looks? That is, this coil over here is weak and it's making it cut up and buck and snort whenever you're driving it. We put that one on there and drove it like this, and it ran so smooth. It ran a whole lot better. All right, when checking a no start, I should, A, get stumps on the newspaper before I write about it. B, listen for the fuel pump, check for power in the injectors, and then recheck reference voltage. C, check for fuel pressure only if I can hear the pump running. Or do B and C and then check for spark and injector faults. All right. Test question 9. On a no start, if I hear the fuel pump when I switch on the key, what do I know as soon as I hear it? What do I know as soon as I hear the pump? Do I know that the PCM's at least powered up and functioning, that there's good fuel pressure, that I also have spark, that I also have fuel injection? And test question 10. Oh, before we get to test question 10, if you pass an ASE test, you boost your grade a letter. You must pass, this is one of mine that I did when I did the research. There was only 20 questions on the research. You may have 40 or 50 questions on the first time certification test. You bring me this paper, it needs a raised seal down here where they put it like a notary, and they actually put their name and all that. And this basically is good for 5 years. If you bring me one of those, it's going to help your grade at the end, okay? This is what they hand you as soon as you're taking your test. It'll actually tell you which one of these you did and all that kind of stuff. Most of mine have got all of them right, some of us got it, some of them don't, Occasionally, if we've got a poorly written question, I might miss one or two questions, but it's not because I don't know what it is, it's because they wrote the question. Okay, this question 10. Finally, if I hear the fuel pump and then find I don't have fuel injector, pulse, or spark, the most probable cause is what? A coil with spark plug crank sensor problem or a strip timing belt. And you guys can register for ASE tests. And if you register for an ASE test and you show me your registration, if you need that day off to go take an ASE test, you show it to me, and you got the whole day off if you're going to take an ASE test that day. Even if it's just 9 in the morning when you're going to take the test, you have the day off. If you can show me where you went to take an ASE test. When you come back, I need to see what your score was. Huh?
What's the price of the test?
The price of the test is, there's a registration fee and a test fee, but you don't pay any more than a certain amount if you pass a certain number of tests. And I think you're probably going to wind up having to pay, I can't remember, I didn't look that up, $35 for the test fee and $70 registration or something like that.
Is that all?
Yeah, or something. It ain't that bad.
Yeah.
But anyway, and that's the end of the story on that.